Hello, Dennis, and welcome back to the Dennis Del Valle Show. I'm Brandon Giella. If you didn't know, I help host this podcast. Some of you maybe are getting confused with the voice of Dennis and myself. So I'm Brandon. Nice to meet you all. Today, Dennis, you were telling me about grief and that is an important topic for you, and that we were going to talk about that today and just have a good conversation about how grief impacts businesses, business
Mhm.
leaders, and how you run a company. And the story that came to mind when you were talking to me was a few weeks ago, I met a young woman who was interested in starting a
Hmm.
business. And we were talking through different things. And she said she asked if I had any books that I would recommend for learning about business, or, how to be an entrepreneur and these sort of things. And nothing really came to mind other than a book called 10-Day MBA. I
Okay.
felt like that was a helpful one for
Sure.
business owners, just basics on accounting and finance, so on.
Mhm.
But other than that, what came to mind and what I told her was, when you're running a business, the problems that you encounter mostly are not business problems. I
Mm.
felt like they're personal, relational, emotional
Mhm.
problems that you have to work on within yourself or within your team or your clients or customers. And that those things are not found in business school.
Mm.
Believe me, I've been there. It wasn't there.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then they're not found in a lot of business books, but I think you'll find them in other I guess skills that you can develop as a leader.
Mhm.
So I'm reading this book called The Art of Living, and it's talking about the cardinal virtues,
Uh,
and the subtitle is "And the Freedom to Love."
uh, uh,
And I find that kind of talk about, prudence, fortitude, temperance, justice,
huh.
these cardinal virtues, and working on them, especially as it relates to things like grief.
Yeah.
Let's say when a client leaves, or when you are afraid of, making payroll at the end of the month, and how you show up, your internal life, your soul, your
Mhm.
emotional intelligence, how you show up in those moments.
Mhm.
I would say, if correct me if I'm wrong,
Mhm.
but I would say that those are the most important and challenging um, times and skills that a business owner would need to take to run their business effectively. How does that sit with you as an expert in these, in grief and in the internal life, and how that affects leadership? Does that story
Yeah.
and that impulse that I have, does that make sense to
Yeah,
you?
that resonates deeply with me. The I really love, and if you wanna circle back with that, entrepreneur, I really love Business Made Simple by Donald Miller.
Ah,
I think that's
okay,
a
that sounds
great
familiar.
resource, and he has many resources, and that's his passion, is to, in an inexpensive, efficient way, offer business coaching, business training, because he too found that business degrees weren't pairing people well, and they're very
Yeah.
expensive and long. And
Yes.
so he has a whole course and systems and books. It's a fantastic resource. And
Cool.
but your intuition is right that there is the reality of, you have to solve a problem for somebody, and a problem that somebody, it's significant enough that they're willing to pay you for. And so what's the problem you're solving? Once you figure that out, and there might be a widget involved, or something that you're tangibly offering, after that, it becomes all about relationships, your relationship with clients, your relationship with your coworkers, your relationship with the production line, how whatever that looks like for your widget. And um, keeping people focused on the problems that they're solving and adding value. That's how we add value to our clients, is they have problems and we have solutions to help them with their problems. And so I really love Donald Miller for that. And but you're right that in your business school, when you take classes, they're not going to talk about the relationship with your clients and how to navigate conflict. And they're not going to talk about, well, what I hope we can really get into deeply today, which is grief. That the topic of grief is vital for leaders, but as leaders, business owners, managers, we really neglect that because we think, oh, that's something you do, in the privacy of your home. That's for when you lose a pet, you lose a parent, or something that you were hoping for doesn't materialize. But that's also business. We make these projections, we have these hopes, we have these goals, we have people that we're invested in. And when those don't materialize, what do we do? How do we metabolize negative realities? How do we metabolize the bad things that happen in business? Because that's business. We take risks. We take a chance. I was watching an Instagram video, and it was a famous tennis player. I can't say his name right, so I won't try. But he talked about the points he normally won. He won 80% of his matches, and he was number one
Wow.
tennis player for a while. But he said he only won, I think, 52 or 54% of his points
Hmm.
of the matches. And so he's losing points all the time. But
Hmm.
he had an ability to move past his losses, to metabolize them. And that's what grief is. Grief is the ability to take in, face fully, a negative reality, a lost point in his case, a lost deal, a goal that's not reached, or a downturn in the economy or in your business. The businesses that survive are able to face fully into those negative realities and move productively with them. Grief is that word that we would put to that productive movement with negative reality. And so, this famous work by Kluber-Ross, where she kind of outlines very unproductive ways of dealing with negative reality. Like the
Yeah.
famous things are denial, protest, um, bargaining with, the negative reality, depression. Like, these are very unproductive ways to face negative reality, and that's what we do in business. We lose a deal, and we blame maybe the salesperson, or we blame the contact we were working with that they weren't forthright with what they want, or we blame we're always looking for someone to blame. That's not totally productive. Trying to find a scapegoat for it. And it's not productive to be in protest where, oh, I can't believe, they went with that competitor. They're not honest. We just are in protest saying, I can't believe, and frustrated, and, you know, walking around irritated, depressed. Like, that's not productive.
That's right.
So what is productive in grief? Like, what should we do when these negative things come at us, and how do we metabolize them in a way that really moves us forward productively? And I've been using that word metabolism a few times because I love it. I think it's a great metaphor for how we take in, how we consume a negative, painful reality. And so, sorry about this. My spam callers. I need to grieve that. Man, I'm getting called at least 25 times a day by these people. Are you too, Brandon?
That's awful.
Yeah.
No, I used to be, not anymore for
Oh
some
my
reason. I
goodness.
don't know
Let's talk
why. I don't
offline
know why
because I
not.
want to figure out how to stop that. But it's
I don't
frustrating.
have a
It's
solution for
all
you.
the time, these spam callers.
Yeah.
So metabolism, how does metabolism work? You eat something, and you take something in, and your body has this amazing way to break down what's taken in. And the good things the nutrients that your body can absorb, the good thing about the food, it has a way to break it down and absorb it into your body, your bloodstream, so that it feeds your body. But some of the things we eat, there isn't anything good in it. And that's okay too. Your body has a way of breaking those down and eliminating them so that they pass through. And so grief is that process of metabolism where we take in this negative reality. And when we do the work of grief, we're able to really look at it and see what we can learn. What's going to help make us stronger? What's going to make us a better business owner, a better salesperson, a better leader? What do I need to learn? And like all things, there will be parts of your experience that it's just a loss. There's nothing really to learn. It really was someone else's bad and there's nothing for you. But grief also helps you to break those down so that you don't get lost in bitterness, resentment, questioning yourself, doubt. Like there's a lot of negative, right, that we can do it.
I'm curious
Yes.
if you see different types of grief show up in businesses
Yeah.
of different sizes or different stages in their
Hmm.
journey
Hmm.
or a different, let's say, career levels.
Hmm.
So, for example, I'm a small business owner.
Yeah.
We serve mostly small businesses. We've
Hmm.
got a small team. The things that I'm dealing with are very different than somebody who's a leader at a Fortune 500 company,
Yeah.
or let's say an entrepreneur, of a small business, but 20 years down the road,
Yeah.
or 20 years, they're 20 years older than me and they've got grown kids and that kind of thing. My whole team, all of our kids, we have 5 kids among us, and they're all under the age of 9, I think.
Okay.
So what we're dealing with is very different,
Yes.
personally, but also in the business sense than somebody who's later in their career. How do you see grief in a business context show up, maybe as you age
Hmm.
or as you grow in the size of company or in your role as a leader
Hmm.
over time?
Hmm. Oh man, that's a great question, man. What comes to my mind is that um, I just think some people naturally face into negative realities. They don't get too um, dysregulated by them. We've talked about
Yeah.
dysregulation in the past, thrown off, flooded. Whereas other people, they really maybe they have a harsh judge that just beats them up, or they're a harsh judge and they're looking to blame someone and these are all unhelpful ways. And what I would want is for the leader, any size company, to roll up their sleeves and say, "Hey, let's really look at what happened here, and what did I do to contribute to this loss, to this failure, to this thing going wrong?" And that I think that's what the great leaders do. They want to look at
Mm.
themselves first, and what can I learn from this? And that's what I really challenge the leaders I work with to lead with that, because we want to get that sense of humility, vulnerability, openness to being wrong normalized in our organizations. It's really dangerous when the leader is what you might call bulletproof or a Superman, like they never do anything wrong. And when leaders are slow to own their mistakes, their failures, it sends this terrible message to the organization. Hey, I don't make mistakes and I don't want to hear about your mistakes. And so that leads to hiding, it leads to denial, and it leads to blaming. And it's just a very unhealthy culture that you end up with. Instead of, a culture where we embrace that, hey, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to be, the greatest tennis player in the world. He lost 46% of the points. And yet he's number one, won the most championships the last 2 years. Or Michael Jordan, he has this great video where he talks about all the shots he's missed. 26 times he was given the ball for the game winning shot and he missed it, and that's part of his greatness is that he was able to metabolize that loss and learn from it, grow from it, see what he could do better. And that's what I would want for the leader. But to get there, we need to have a way of grieving and facing in.
I can hear some listeners thinking, that sounds
Yeah,
really
yeah.
great.
Okay.
I should be more vulnerable in my
Yes.
life, and that sounds,
Sounds
like
good. Yes.
sounds good on paper, but the actual act of being vulnerable and not only expressing verbally like, "Hey, I failed,"
Mhm.
or "I'm afraid of this,"
Mhm.
but even just thinking that thought,
Mhm.
like, I mean, running a business, I've had some dark thoughts, just like, "I am not good at this,"
Mm.
nobody likes what I'm doing.
Hmm.
I'm not going to succeed. I'm going to let my team down, and therefore I'm going to let their families down who are depending on this paycheck.
Hmm.
I mean, there's like these really fearful moments that you have as a leader, and that's step one. And then step two is to just express that and to
Hmm.
tell, like, say, for example, my team or my
Hmm.
clients, and say, hey, I really let you down.
Hmm.
I did not do a good job with this because of X and Y reason. I'm afraid.
Hmm.
I have fears. My team and I were actually talking about our fears a couple of days ago, because we were working on our communication practices, and we all started talking about, like, hey, I have this fear from my previous workplace, or I have this
Yes.
fear from childhood or whatever, that and because of that fear, it creates anxiety and my communication isn't as good or something. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is, how do you take a step before you start grieving, your failures, or,
Hmm.
or just different parts of your business? How do you even take a step to, like, I need to be more, open with myself
Hmm.
and confront myself and my own weaknesses?
Yeah.
Like, how do you even start that process?
You brought up a lot of powerful things, like importance of vulnerability, importance of ownership, and do I have a character that can take in my bad when I am
Mhm.
falling short? And I think it's very hard to, if we didn't get some of that from our parents, that solid sense that we're okay and that we're going to be okay, then we can have a lot of defensiveness around that, where we really won't take the time to listen to someone's negative critique of us, or take the time to really look at something that went wrong. I hear, and there's some good intention in this. Leaders will say, "Hey, I don't want to hear problems. I want to hear solutions." And and
Yeah,
and that's,
totally.
I mean, there's a place for that. But there's a place where it's like, "Hey, we got a problem and I don't have a solution. Like, can we talk about
Mhm.
this?" And so, but Bill, i- if you had a very harsh parent in your childhood, or on the other extreme, if you didn't have a parent that really helped you metabolize, I'm using that word a lot, negative realities when things go wrong, teaching you a more mature way of facing negative things by their engagement, then you're going to struggle with that. Because the default in us, the immature way, is hiding from bad, is denial, is blame, is playing the victim. That's the child posture. And that's the immature posture, and we're stuck with that if we don't have someone come alongside and teach us a better way. Teach us that, like, to use very Christian terms, we're loved, we're accepted, we're grounded and rooted in love, as Paul talks about in Ephesians 3. And so that's the antidote to this, is really having a sense of a value that supersedes an immediate experience. And I think that's what allows you, Brandon, to say to, like, your team or to a client, "Hey, I blew it." Because if your value is all tied up in this immediate negative thing, then, if you're only as good as your last point, if you're only as good as your last win, if you're only as good as your last success, it's dependent on what you do, well, then you're lost. And that's that insecure leader. And unfortunately, I do see that in a lot of, poor leaders. They're so defensive about, I'm good, I'm right, that it just makes for unhealthy culture, and everybody's frustrated around them because you can't talk to them about things going
Yeah.
wrong. You can't talk about the real topics. And so, unfortunately, that's a family of origin issue that hasn't been resolved, and now it's leaking into your leadership. It's leaking into your organization, and you're not going to be able to scale and really go up. Now, I guess you can, because I have heard of very people that have been very successful, but they just don't keep people around. People don't want to
"Quote, unquote,
stick with them.
successful."
Yeah, they just
Yeah.
run through people. And as Henry Cloud talks about, their weight behind them is just relationship loss and people not
Yeah.
trusting them and wanting to be in it.
Yeah.
just broken relationships everywhere, and it's just destructive. And so if
Yeah.
we want to have that success where we really have behind us awake people that are, um, loved working with us. We really
Yeah.
built into their families and built wealth that was all, really holistic wealth. Then we've got to learn how to take in negative reality.
I would say it's family of origin stuff
Yeah.
too, but it's also it's like just a business culture. I mean,
Hmm.
if you're a leader, if you're a professional, you're running a business, you get on LinkedIn, for example, and or you go to a conference,
Yeah.
or or you hear stories. If I could simplify and generalize, it's basically hustle and grind, work hard, keep going, compete,
Hmm.
all these kind of like tough, this tough like success
Yeah.
language. And then and then there's no room for like failure in that, to say like, hey, I didn't do a good job here. Nobody's public about that, because it loses trust.
Yeah.
Maybe your clients don't trust you, or your team doesn't trust you, or something. So there's this kind of yeah, it's this kind of like theme that, do all these hard things, raise that money, and then it's just business. If you got to lay off people, if you got to do this and that, it's just business.
Hmm.
And I think that's hard. It makes people be afraid of wanting to be
It's very
to grieve.
short-sighted, and I think Brene Brown's done
Yeah.
a nice job in her books and TED Talks breaking down it's a false belief. It's just not true, and it breaks
Mm.
trust. And I've heard research from a lot of different places. Like, if a medical professional makes a mistake, the likelihood that they will get sued and have malpractice lawsuits after that is highly correlated with how they if they own their mistake and say, "Hey, I made a mistake. I blew this." And they've shown, like, the doctors that actually do that get sued way less than the ones that are defensive and blaming of others. And so, and people just hate working with people that are. I think we lose clients when we break trust and we can't just own, like, "Hey, I missed this. Can you give me another chance?"
Mm.
And
Yeah.
yeah, there's space of like, "No, that was too big of a miss. I can't give you another chance." But I find people are gracious when people are vulnerable and honest, and,
Yeah.
within a range, of course. But it's that denial, defensiveness, blaming others. People just, man, that no one wants to work with people like that. And that's the
Yeah.
destructiveness, I think, and the lack of vulnerability. And I think as we're talking, maybe our next podcast, we should just devote it all to vulnerability, because it keeps coming up.
Mm.
But the
Yeah.
I think, to get back to, because I think they're all related to grief. Grief is vulnerable. I'll tell a story, and then we'll kind of wrap up with some points. But this morning, I was taking my son to school, and we were driving to school together. He's 16, and he's going to get his license this week, at least if he passes his test, right? And so, as I was driving with him to school, I realized this is probably the last time I'll take him to school, and got really emotional. I'm getting a little emotional now remembering it. This, because this has been his whole life. I've driven him to school, or at least he and my wife, we take turns driving, my wife and I. But and there's been so many sweet conversations and times of talking. Now, not every time. A lot of times we're just quiet and grumpy because we're both tired. We just want to get to school. But man, we've had so many. So we talked about, I asked him what's he enjoyed about our drive to school. And he was very sweet. He said something about, I've liked the podcasts we've listened to and the conversations we've had. And I just have liked being with you, Dad. And I was just like, oh
Mm.
man, I got so emotional. And a part of me was like, well, why would I give this up? Why don't I just keep driving him to school? And it's like, no, it's time. I need to grieve that he's growing up. And and one of the beautiful things about grief is it acknowledges the good. And this has been a good, he and I driving to school together. Like, that's been a good, the sweet time of conversation we've had in the car together. And so part of grief is it hurts because it was a good that's now
Mhm.
going to be gone. And the second part of grief that is so meaningful for me is that when we grieve well, it makes space for the new. And I've really seen that with my daughter. You know, she's gone off to college and I really miss her. She adds so much to our family. And what's in the and her being gone really impacts our family. And yet what's happening is it's so fun to see the young woman she's growing into. And I call her and she has all these exciting things to share with me. And I see we're developing an adult relationship where she really wants to hear about my life, things I'm doing. And so I've had to grieve her moving on. And because I've been able to grieve that, it's made space for this new relationship. And I remember when she was just turning into a teenager, I was struggling with grief. I wanted her to stay that little girl, and she fought me on it. And instead of a smooth transition, we were struggling because I wanted her to
Mhm.
stay a little girl and sit on my lap, and I could read to her. She was done with that. She'd outgrown it. And so as I grieved that she doesn't sit on my lap anymore and wants to be read to, it started making space for this teenage girl that was emerging. And so grief, the powerful work of grief is it makes space for the new. When we don't grieve, we just keep holding on to the past and we won't let go and make space for the new. And I do want to make some applications to business, but I see, Brandon, that this is really impacting you. What's going on with you?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm getting emotional. Making me cry over here. Yes, just yesterday, I dropped off my 18-month-old daughter at
Mhm.
daycare,
Mhm.
and she's just starts playing with her friends and just moves on. And I'm like going home
Yeah.
and going to work, and I just miss her. And I have to like grieve that she's grown up. She's only 18 months old. She's like
Yes.
just starting to walk like in the last month or two. Um, And then today, I dropped her off at daycare, and we walked together across the parking lot. It's the first time that we had walked from the car
Uh-huh.
to the gate where I dropped her off. And I'm just so sad about her not being this little baby.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, it's a lot of grief,
That is grief.
grief work to do. Yeah, because it impacts my daily life, my emotions, my
Mhm.
productivity, my performance,
Mhm.
all those kind of things. If I can't like let things like that go
Yes.
in a healthy way,
Yes.
not just like don't forget about them, but just like, yeah, it is really sad because it was a good thing.
Exactly.
But she's grown up and she's gonna start having opinions, and we
Yes.
gotta start educating her, not disciplining her, educating her. And yeah, I'm working through that because she's such a cute little girl.
Yeah. And the sadness that you're feeling, and I'm feeling it with you, Brandon, the sadness, it communicates value.
Hmm.
That this was such a valuable experience, that this is such a valuable time. And what we do is it hurts, and our natural tendency is to avoid hurt. Like, what's the purpose? Like, why should I face this? But we need to lean into these feelings. We need to let that value have an impact. And it makes us more human. It makes us more alive. It also wakes us up to reality. And I think this pain is good because it's calling you, Brandon, to stay awake, stay
Hmm.
engaged. Time is passing, and we need to stay connected to the truth that hey, these days are numbered. Enjoy the day. Be present to the day. And I hope that this pain doesn't get wasted, that you really let it inform you and inform your priorities and inform your goals and inform your decisions, because it's easy to mess this stuff up, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, you know, so we both this week have had this powerful experience
It's
driving to
hard, man.
school and
Yeah.
commuting, me on and a little further down on the end, you at the beginning, closer to the beginning.
Yeah. Well, in 5 minutes, what do we do, Dennis? Help me get over this. Uh,
Well, and I think personally grief is so important, and but I also want to make some tie-ins for business too. But
yeah. Yeah.
the on the personal side, we just need comfort. Grief needs
Mm,
comfort. We shouldn't be grieving alone. That's why I'm so happy to be talking with you about this, is that you need comfort. You know, when we cry alone, it's really incomplete. Your crying's great, but we need to grieve in the company of others, and that's what comfort really is, the key ingredient for grief. We get stuck and we get complicated grief. We get stuck in our grief. We don't grieve well when we don't have the people that come alongside us and acknowledge the painful experience with us. And
yeah.
and that's it. And there's not, I think we screw grief up because with others, because we feel like
Mm,
we should say something or do something or take it away.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
instead, we just need people that will sit with us and acknowledge the
Yeah.
pain with us. There's no fixing grief. There's just feeling it, letting it be.
I was about to say, I'm sad about my daughter, or I feel fear about my business or
Hmm.
my leadership or whatever. There's no solution.
Yeah,
I feel these things and they're just
yeah,
there.
yeah.
There's nothing you can do about it as somebody, sharing it with me.
Hmm.
I think it's important to note.
Yeah. And I think that's in business where we get stuck, because grief is about things in the past and you can't fix the past. There's nothing you can do about the past. The past is
Mhm.
done. And so then we don't even want to look at the past because we feel powerless. And that's not helpful. We do need to embrace the past and engage it with whatever it needs. For some things, it just needs a simple acknowledgement like, wow, that was painful. That hurt. That was a big loss, losing that account or the little event you had with your daughter. All these things are, it's in the same realm. Or, sometimes the loss is having a key employee leave your organization, you know. And then I think we do need to take time to look at what happened and see what we can learn from it. Not in a judgy way, but in a holistic, just what can I learn from this experience? Is there something I should have done differently? Is there something I could have done differently as a team? What do we learn? And having this process shared is key, just like you and I right now are sharing in this, seeing what we can learn,
Uh,
embrace feeling the feelings. And that's what then sets us up to move on productively. Signs that we're not moving on productively are having a lot of bitterness or regret. Regret is a sign that you have not grieved something. If you're replaying conversations or situations in your head over and over again, that's a sign that you haven't grieved it. You haven't gotten
mm,
comfort. You haven't acknowledged. You haven't learned from or processed that experience. You haven't truly metabolized it. That's why your mind keeps bringing it forward.
mm,
So, another sign is when you keep having the same
interesting.
problems over and over again. You're not learning something. If key
Yeah.
employees keep leaving, key clients keep leaving, you keep losing, your bids and stuff. Hey, something's going on. What are you not facing into fully? And so when you see these patterns
Mm.
that keep coming, and so, let's find our safe person. Let's really look into how we feel about things, how the past is impacting us, and make space for it so that we can move on, so that we can make space for the new. Uh, One of the members in my leadership program just got really bad news yesterday. They lost a huge client.
Mm.
I mean, huge. This is going to be devastating for one
Mm.
of their employees. It's
Mm.
nearly half his revenue. And I'm going to be
Mm.
helping him grieve that, learn from it, grow from it so that he can move on and make space. Because if he gets lost in regret, if he gets lost in bitterness and blame and frustration with the process, you can see he's not looking ahead. He doesn't have the space. He doesn't have the energy. He doesn't have the creativity. So when we don't grieve, it kills our creativity. It kills our energy for the new. So I'm going to be helping him this week as we process this huge loss, helping him metabolize so that he can have the space to look for the new opportunities and to learn and grow from this.
This is so important, those signals, to pay attention to those signals.
Yeah.
That's really, really helpful.
Yeah. Don't avoid them.
I wanted to end with this. Short passage. So this is from the Art of Living book, and it talks about how patience is a sub virtue, if you will, of fortitude.
Okay.
And patience, he talks about bearing sorrows well. It's the subtitle of that chapter, and he's got this section. He says, the patient person, therefore, possesses a great freedom. He is free to stay on course with his life and fulfill his responsibilities, at least to some reasonable extent, even when bad things happen to him. The person lacking in patience, however, is so overcome by his troubles that he fails to give the best of himself in his relationships with others. And I feel like that's such a a good virtue to take on this grief, is to bear that well in order to give your best self to the people around.
Best self to others, allow people in to be with you. If you don't learn grief, you're going to turn into that bitter old person that is lonely, no one wants to be in a relationship with, and is filled with regret. And we don't want that. We want to be alive. We want to be free. We want to be ready for the next new thing. Grief is what we have to have. We have to have it because bad things are coming our way. Like that poor tennis player, he's going to lose, that 46% of the points. But when you can overcome that, then you can become all that you are meant to be, all that you have inside you, all that your business meant to be. And as parents, as fathers, we have to grieve so that we can be the best fathers. We show up for our children. So.
Amen. Dennis, thank you.
Awesome.
Beautiful, insightful, as always. I'm excited to talk next time about vulnerability.
We'll do vulnerability next time.
How to get more in there. Yeah, I love that. Okay, we'll see you next time. Dennis, thank you again.
Awesome. Thank you, Brandon.